So we're going to go ahead and begin now. My name is Elise Geither, and I am hosting today. This is TESOL International Association's Supporting Students with Disabilities Interest Section, and we are pleased to present the webinar titled Beyond Compliance, Elevating the Voice of Immigrant Families in the Special Education Process. Our speaker is Milena Varbanova. We are very pleased to welcome all of you to this webinar. My name again is Elise Geither, and I will be your moderator for today's event, and I'll be checking the chat for your questions. Please feel free to place your questions in the chat. Please leave your mic off, and you can leave your camera off as well. This is being recorded, so you can access it later. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Milena Varbanova.
Thank you, Liz. Good morning, everyone. I wish I could see your faces, but I'm grateful regardless if I see you or not for your attendance today. At least in Ohio, it is a beautiful fall day and it is easy to prioritize other needs, but I'm very appreciative of your interest and willingness to take the time to learn, hopefully, a little bit more about how we can improve the special education process with more meaningful involvement of immigrant parents who are also most of the time English learners themselves. I hope you can see the screen, and if you have some challenges to hear me or see, please make a note so we can address that. I have tried to create slides that will provide some balance between engagement during the presentation as well as some resources for later on, so we can all remember what we talked about. And with that, we'll start, and I'll start with, let's see, okay. Why it doesn't, with my personal journey, as you can hear it in my voice and probably determined by my name. I was not born in the United States, and I know that all of our personal experiences lead to a lot of our professional, shape our professional choices. And in my case, I'm from Bulgaria, and since it's a small country, and since I'm an English learner too, I included a map so you can orient yourself and see some of the probably better known countries such as Greece and Turkey, because they're larger and probably more touristy than Bulgaria, but you can see where I'm coming from. Why is that important? Why is my personal background important? Because as I already mentioned, the personal experiences shape how we adjust to this new country of the United States, and it determines to large extent our professional choices if we have the privilege to pursue our interest. And in that case, I was able to. But first, I'll go back to my personal story, which I will encourage you as an educator to learn the story of each immigrant family that comes to your schools or you interact with, because that story really matters, and that story will help you engage with every family better and know how to best support them, as well as learn from each one of them. So I'm Bulgarian, obviously an immigrant to the United States at this point. I am also an English learner. I came at 24 with my husband, who is also Bulgarian, and our son, who is now 31 almost. He was born in Bulgaria. We have two girls as well who were born here. So that last experience listed there as a parent shaped a lot of my professional interest. In Bulgaria, my degree was in psychology, and obviously once we determined that we'll live in the United States, all of a sudden I was not going to become an engineer. So I still wanted to stay within the general area of social sciences, but really what determined my huge commitment to work with schools was that wall that you see, that brick wall between the personal and professional experiences listed on the slide, that I have felt as a parent. As an immigrant, there are many communities that are very integrated. There are many internal community supports available to Bulgarian families, to Turkish families, to Uzbek families, to any kind of community. We depend a lot on each other, and we try to help each family navigate the new environment and experiences. But schools are such an organization that most parents, even if they are isolated at home, if they don't have jobs that provide opportunities to integrate in the society very well and use English a lot, schools are a place where we have to interact with educators. And when I did that as a parent, I felt that huge barrier between our families and the schools. And I know this presentation is focused on students with disabilities. In my case, I don't have personally a child with a disability, but as a school psychologist, which was my first professional experience in the States, I worked in two large suburban and one urban district, serving primarily English learners families as a school psychologist. Then I also became an educational consultant. I teach classes at two universities in the Cincinnati area in Ohio. And currently I work as a district EL program administrator for a large suburban district with 1/3 of our population being not English learners, but multilingual speakers, and many are immigrant families. Of the 10,000 students, more than 3,000 are immigrant families from other countries. And last year, I completed a research study which was focused on the immigrant parents' involvement and understanding of the special education process. Through all of this experience, really my purpose, my desire is to find ways to advocate directly and indirectly, hopefully by doing presentations like that and involving other parents and individuals in the process, to really advocate for inclusive, equitable, and accessible education for all English learners. So the objectives from my perspective for today are listed here. And I will go briefly over them, but I will also state if you have something else on your mind that you would like to be addressed at the end or after the presentation, I'm happy to support that in any way I can. So thinking of the topic, the first thing I wanted to do and felt was beneficial for all of us to do, to really revisit how complex and challenging the special education process is in general, and how difficult it is for parents to find their role in the process. Following that, to identify visible and invisible barriers for many parents, but especially for immigrant parents. And those barriers are in the process of just interacting with the schools, not just in special education, but in general, for building authentic relationships with educators. Then briefly review the key experiences of immigrant parents who have students with disabilities. And following that, discuss universal supports, meaning universal for every family in the district who is immigrant, who are English learners, and then focus on a little bit more targeted support for the subset of families who have students who might have disabilities, go through the process and need to participate in that. And the biggest hope and objective is to make some of the implicit obstacles and knowledge more explicit, so we are all aware of what they are, and realize that families have a huge potential to contribute to that process, and figure out what our role is to make sure that potential is unlocked and utilized. So a little bit busy slide because that is a very complex process. So what we know about special education system in the States and the process itself, especially in relation to the topic of immigrant families and their involvement. So we know that the special education system as a form of support for students with disabilities in the United States is a very unique system, a system that doesn't exist in most other countries. What that means right away, and what it tells us right away, is that parents who come from other countries, they have no concept of what special education is unless we truly explain that and explain it multiple times and truly monitor or check for understanding, because they have no point of reference. If we say special education in this webinar, all of us have an understanding what it is, but parents don't understand what it is because they don't come from countries where these supports exist. They may exist to some extent, but it could be in a very segregated or much less developed form. As a result, these different understandings of what supports for students with disabilities are shape the participation and the desire even of the parents to participate in a process involving students with disabilities. So it is important to recognize that, because that's the first step to understand how big of an obstacle that lack of agreement or shared understanding of what we are talking about when we say special education and the process itself means. So it is very conceptually complex process. It is not just matter of translation, which we'll discuss a little bit later. So if you say special education to a new parent, you may say pink education, blue education, green education. It doesn't have a meaning unless we assign meaning and accurate meaning to that construct, social construct. It is very highly structured, and that is done because it's a very a legally defined process, but that high structure presents some rigidity that is often an obstacle for immigrant parents who come from other cultures that are very differently organized. The communication is different, and it feels very formal, very rigid, very uninviting, very paperwork driven, and not person oriented. And I'll step back to address the integrated system of support above in the first item, because I failed to mention something very important. United States has one of the most integrated system, meaning every child, regardless of their level of need and special need, are part of the regular learning community. Certainly that is a unique experience for some of the immigrant families, but what it means for the educator side that I think is exceptionally critical is that because it is an integrated system, it is often it is much easier to identify a student who might be typical, who might have needs that the regular education system cannot meet, but they are identified as students with disability in order for their needs to be met, not necessarily because of true disability, but because the inability of the general education system to support the learners who may be coming with interrupted formal education or very limited formal education. So where that is really a good thing in some way, it is also a risky option for the students who truly do not have a disability. And that is the visual at the top, which is yes, no, does a student have a disability or not? The whole process and the outcomes of the evaluation process often is associated with high level of uncertainty. And I personally feel professionally and based on my professional experience that parents have a huge opportunity to contribute to that process and bring more certainty to the decision. The disproportionate representation is often discussed when we talk about the special education process, and it is really takes two basic forms. It is certainly on the continuum, but it means that in some cases students are under-identified, and in other districts, in other systems, they are over-identified. So neither one is good for their own good reasons. But that is a fact that disproportionate representation has been an issue for a number of years, since probably the whole system was developed, and it is typically a result of lack of solid instructional and assessment practices versus true reflection of, oh, all Bulgarians are 80% disabled, so therefore their higher representation could be explained that way. Another important factor for the special education process is the lack of representation of immigrant and English learner families or individuals like me in the teaching staff and related services staff. Why is that important? Because as educators, we see the world from our own lens. We see it from the perspective of the dominant culture. We see it not in a way that doesn't recognize the value of the different experiences that the families bring. And as a result, a lot of their behaviors, knowledge, skills are seen as deficiency. We often talk about what's missing, where the child is not achieving, and that's often attributed to a disability, but it is often a lack of understanding of the on the educator side of how diverse these experiences are and valuing that diversity. A very important thing to always remember that it is a big decision in any child's life. It is not simply a way to provide more support. It is not a way to excuse the general educators for truly supporting the student. It is a different experience from the norm, and we often from the typical students, and while the intentions are always good, the outcomes are often questionable. There are many studies that have documented the underachievement of students with disabilities and the difficulties to obtain the same social, emotional, and academic outcomes. So it is not a trivial decision, a decision that we can just make with the hope that that would be the best for the child, especially if we don't have high confidence that the student is truly disabled. One good thing about the process is that it promotes and requires active involvement of families. A school could not make a decision without the active participation of the family or their signatures or their agreement to the changes to the typical learning process. So that is a good foundation on which we could build a lot. It is not unique to just English learners and families, immigrant families, that they do not truly understand the process, the outcomes, and how to best advocate for their students. So whatever you do as a school district and the practices that you engage in to promote the active, meaningful participation of immigrant families will truly benefit every single family in the district, and that is, well, in my opinion, invested effort. So as you can see, there are so many areas that are in need of improvement and so many factors that play a role in the decision for if a student will be identified or not and how they will be served. For this specific presentation, the focus is just the family and how we can learn from them and support them in the process. So we are pursuing mutual goals that are agreed upon. And we do that because, as you can see, that scale at the bottom of the slide, often, if not 99% of my, based on my professional experience, I can tell you that the educators have the control. They can, they know the process, they know the jargon, they know how to communicate, and often parents, even if they don't truly agree, they feel powerless. They don't know how to contradict an opinion or a position shared by an educator. So that scale is really heavy on one side, where, in my opinion, the goal, the legal process, the way it is defined, is to really have an equal representation and weight in the process. So with that, why focus on families? There are so many areas, as I said, that we could improve on and think about and address at any point. But families are, I would say, one of the easiest, because we can take each family at a time. We can build systems of supports around the families that will give us tremendous benefit in any process, the general and special education process, but it is relatively easy to do. In my opinion, it is not frequently done, but it is not hard thing to do. If we are mindful of the needs, if we are mindful of the importance, if we choose some strategies and approaches that work for our specific population. The families, focusing on the families is also very important because, as I already mentioned, they know what educators don't know. Just by definition, the immigrants are coming from all over the world. They bring such a diverse set of experiences and needs and strengths that any educator who was raised and has been just in US doesn't have an idea what they are. And that is such a critical piece in order to learn and successfully support any student in our schools. So that's a wealth of knowledge that we don't typically access in a purposeful way. And as I said, I mentioned already, the decisions are not always obvious. How the world, how we see the world, and you can see the beautiful picture and the quote there is from our lens. But the parents, they are coming from different culture. They could have very different perspective on what is best for the student. So those decisions are not easy. They should not be controlled by the educators because only they should be supported by the educators. It should be, again, a shared collaborative process, which in practice doesn't typically happen to the extent that it's intended. So based on my personal experience, parents have a lot of knowledge and experiences that educators do not and do not often at all recognize exist. So therefore, they cannot understand certain challenges. I know when I came to this country, my first job was requiring to use a locker. I had no idea how to use a locker. And that code twisting, turning was extremely difficult, not because I'm incompetent, not because I could not learn, but because that was such a new experience for me. And we have students coming from places where there's no running water, no electricity, certainly no technology. We put them in our fancy buildings, give them one device, present very challenging and very different set of expectations that they don't know how to navigate, and they may look lost to us. They may look like they certainly don't know how to navigate the environment, but that is not a reflection of their ability or willingness to learn or their potential. It is simply lack of interaction with those variables in the environment. So that's very important to recognize. And I have found over time that teachers who are very quick to express concern about students, they also are very quick to adjust their expectations once they hear their story and understand their previous background. The parents know, the families know their children the best. They have valuable information about their previous experience. They could tell us how the child was educated. Was it one room schoolhouse in Guatemala with no running water and electricity, or was it a very technologically advanced school in Japan? So all of these factors make a significant difference in terms of adjustment to the new learning environment. And the more we know, the better we can support the child and the family as well. The families have their own set, as I said already, very different as far as social, developmental, academic, and emotional priorities for their children. Usually the transition coming to this country as an immigrant is extremely challenging emotionally. Adjusting is difficult for the parents as well as the children. So we have to be mindful of what the most important priorities from the family's point of view are as well. Not just say, well, the student just came to us in 7th grade, he or she is behind, we have to catch them academically. Of course, that should be an important goal, but we have to be mindful of all the other areas that are not typically as critical if the child was born and raised here. The other piece that is often overlooked and in the study that I did was very prevalent was parents would say, I knew something was very different for my child, but nobody listened. I will go to the doctor, I'll go to the school psychologist, I'll go to this, to that, and they'll say, oh, it's just second language. So my invitation here is to really be more trusting and open to what the parents have to say, and listen to their concerns and see what's behind the reason for them to express that concern. I have multiple examples. If we had 10 hours, I would give you all of them, share all of them. But please know that parents often have the best perspective. We don't speak all these languages. We don't have their experiences. They can determine often the best if a concern is just present in English, or because English is the additional language, or is that concern really across all languages, and the concern should be looked at appropriately and in depth, but that is again not the reality for many families, which results then in loss of valuable time to provide early intervention or school age intervention, depending on when the child comes to us. But just be open-minded and engage, listen to the parents. Don't just say, oh, well, they're just English learners, we have to wait so long to assess them, or they have to reach language proficiency, or when they speak, they're learning 2 languages, their development is different. All of that is true under some conditions, but in order for us to make the best decision as educators, we truly have to sit down and listen to what the parent has to say, understand where they're coming from, and not just giving them an excuse to wait longer. So most parents are highly invested in their children's social and academic outcomes. Most immigrants come here to the States sacrificing their own professional experiences and competencies. There are so many examples of that. They do it with the hope to create a better, to provide better life for their kids. So they are very willing and ready and competent partners in that process. So very quickly about the research project that I did, and you can see COVID is present there, and I put it there to show that even in the year of COVID, in the project started in 2020 and finished this spring, parents are eager to share their stories. They have a lot to say. They are so invested in advocating for their own child, one, but even more importantly, two, is making sure that other families have better experiences. So when I reached out to families, as you can see at the bottom, a little bit out of order, the participants were 12 immigrant families from 9 different countries speaking 7 different languages. They were willing to engage with me in 2 or 3 interviews, again, during very difficult pandemic, challenging times across the board, but they took that time. They wanted to share. So I use that as indicator to say, to communicate that everybody wants to be heard and they have so much to say. And if we take that time, we'll be in a better place. So the objectives for this study was to determine their understanding of key concepts, activities, and implications of this process. That was the first objective because I felt in our district, as you can see, it's a large suburban district. 1/3 of the population comes from another country, 70 different home countries and 75 different languages. So when you see that, you can see that we have the whole world truly in our hands. We have access to so many cultures, but we also have a group of parents primarily who are middle-class, college-educated, professional families. And when you look at research done with immigrant families or parents of English learners, you often see a lower educational level. And many times I feel educators attribute the lack of understanding or willingness to participate, or however they conceptualize the lack of meaningful collaboration to lower education now level or lack of language proficiency. So in this case, we have very highly educated families with professional jobs who are willing to tell us how they felt. All of them have children, at least one with a disability. They have gone through the process, and they were able to respond to all the questions, addressing their understanding as well as the specific challenges that they have faced, challenges that they wish other parents do not face. And they, of course, shared ideas how to make the process better. So just once again, they have a lot to say, and we have to listen. So the key takeaways from this study were not surprising to me. They simply validated my previous experience of working as a school psychologist for so many years, interacting with families, knowing what they would do and say during the meeting and what their struggles, guessing what their struggles might be. But here I have captured some of the key takeaways. So the most fundamental one is that we cannot make assumptions about any parent and what they know, such as I said, if they're highly educated, the teacher may think, oh, those are professional families. They are working in the tech department for Procter & Gamble. They should be really understanding, and we don't need to really do anything extra. Well, let me just say that that is not at all the case. Assumptions could not be made. Each family, regardless of their language proficiency and educational level, often obtained in other countries and often obtained in areas that are not at all related to education. So you could be the best programmer, but you have no idea how the general and special education system works here. You are not really an informed participant unless the school as the system does things to support that understanding and engagement. So every family is unique. Every family brings their own knowledge, background, experiences, and needs. And we have to know what they are. So don't make assumptions. One of the shared experiences or way to kind of predict that there will be more challenges and deeper needs to greater needs to explain and listen was the limited acculturation. So families who have been here, some of the families have been here for 20 years. Some have been for 2 years. All of them, again, have students who are identified, but there was a big difference in the understanding depending of the process and their comfort level to engage in the process, their ability to advocate depending on the time spent in US, but not time spent in US sitting at home and not being integrated in social structures, but really active involvement in the society in many different forms, including the schools. So that is an additional kind of alert. If the family is new, you should expect that there are a lot more challenges that we need to, or barriers or things that they don't understand that we need to focus on. Absence of language barrier at all does not guarantee understanding. I could tell you a whole story in English about Bulgaria that is based on Bulgarian culture and concepts that you are not familiar with, and you would not gain meaning from that simply because you don't have the conceptual understanding and cultural background, although the language is not a barrier. So in this study, we used interpreters. Some of the parents were fluent in English. So language was not, and we also had evidence that at any point of the process that language barrier was addressed. Even with that, that was not at all enough to guarantee understanding. So often that is the first visible thing, and we say, oh, they don't speak English, we have to provide an interpreter. Great, but that is great first step, but certainly not enough. So be mindful of how much deeper the need for understanding is than just presenting it through an interpreter, which by itself it has its own challenges as far as competency of the interpreter and accuracy of the interpretation, and often we'll mention a little bit later how uncomfortable it is for parents to ask the educators questions. So they often would ask the interpreter, what do you think? What do you think I should do? So we have to be mindful of these risks that are out there, and really speak with the interpreters and make sure they are not advising or making suggestions, because they truly do not have necessarily at all, unless they are an educator and part of the team, to make that recommendation. So the other big takeaway is that the outcomes of the process, the outcomes for the students, short and long-term outcomes, are often controlled not by the access to special education services, but to a lot of other resources, social resources and knowledge that the parents can use to reach the desired outcomes. So if it's just the special education services provided for the kid, that's many times would not be enough to help them reach the outcomes that the parents are hoping for. So access to social knowledge, social capital, and resources is often needed in addition to the special education services to truly reach the goals that the families have for the student. The process uniformly, regardless of the level of acculturation, time in US language proficiency, is overwhelming, confusing, and frustrating. Not a single parent said that was so much fun, I enjoy it. It is work that needs to be done. It is often very emotionally charged. I would say even more so for the families from certain cultures and countries. And I'll give an example. Japan is one where just even discussing some challenges or needs of the child could be very painful, very embarrassing. And that makes the participation, adds a layer of barrier to the process, because that is extremely uncomfortable conversation for them. So understanding their perspective, understanding their emotional response should shape how we then approach the interaction and how we even find interpreters. So if we already know that is a very emotionally difficult conversation, and it is in their culture some form of embarrassment, we would not ask another member of the same small community. All those communities are relatively small in general, to interpret, because then that would be information shared with others that may not be desirable at all by the parents. So we truly need to understand all that to be able to find the right supports. Parents were very clear to say things didn't feel right, but because they are not educators, because they don't know the process inside and out, they often have very hard time identifying what is wrong. They could say that they were not in control, they were lacking power, but as they are not, again, educators and don't have that background knowledge, they don't know how to do things differently to have their advocacy accomplish the desired outcomes from their perspective. Even the most willing participants felt deprived of opportunities to contribute in a meaningful way. So that does not feel right is universal. So we have to dig a little bit deeper and understand how we can tilt that scale so it is in the right position. So in summary, families have a lot to say. We don't often give them that opportunity. As I said earlier, it is paperwork driven. We start these meetings, typically here are the forms. We go through the forms. They are very structured, very rigid, and there is no opportunity often for in-depth discussion that is not guided by forms or limited by time. So we have to create these opportunities. So some of the obstacles that we already mentioned in some way, some are very visible, and I know that's not the pictures from the Little Prince do not have that meaning, but I thought that was a good way to remember. So the visible obstacles are communication. We could say, oh, they don't understand, or they don't speak English. That's very easy to detect a barrier. A barrier often from both sides, teacher and parents, would be, oh, it is so compliance driven, it is paperwork driven. We don't truly have meaningful opportunities to engage in in-depth discussion. It is, we have to meet that criteria, we have to do this form, everything is compliance oriented. In that process, the substance, the intent of the process is kind of lost. And interagency collaboration is also often easy to detect, because if we say to the parent, oh, they failed the vision test, they have to go to the children's hospital to be evaluated, often that's not done because the parents may not know how to navigate that system. So that is also kind of an easy area to understand and say, oh, we need to maybe connect with children. Yes, we need to get records release form. We need to have that communication to support the families to accomplish the steps that they need to. So there, I'm sure, other visible obstacles and barriers that you can identify in there. One set of challenges. The other ones are the invisible challenges, the ones that are associated more so with the culture, not just the language. Myself, coming from another country, working, being a parent, interacting with general education teachers was very frustrating, very overwhelming. I felt lost. I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel I could make meaningful contributions in any way. It was pretty much my way or the highway. It is not a collaborative process, even again for much lower stakes decisions, which is general education decisions versus special education. So one of the areas that parents emphasized tremendously is, okay, we have so many special education meetings as part of the process. I know the goals and objectives. I hear what they are doing, but what I really, really want to know is the impact of this work on the general education. And I have no idea what they are doing in general education. I don't know how they are engaged. Are they reaching the goals? Because we often focus on the IEP and the specific targeted, isolated areas that the special education team works on. So that's a very large area of invisible need. The general education, understanding also the intricacies of the special education process, understanding their role. I'm yet to see a team that says to the parents, we are equal partners in that, and you have as much control, as much of an power than with us, whatever the preposition is. So it is very important to communicate with the parents that their role is to actively participate, but it is for us to create those opportunities in a meaningful way. Another big area is discomfort in interacting with school personnel. It's also very cultural. Even in my country, we don't necessarily talk to the teachers. That's an area that they are experts. It's not an expectation. It is not desirable. It is just not a common practice. So when we have families who don't know the system, who are new to the country, and ask them to engage in that discussion, we have to realize that it's very uncomfortable. And what that means is maybe before we present the forms and start the structured meeting, we have other opportunities to develop these relationships and trust. Often, the other side of that or continuation of that is that parents have huge trust, see the educators as experts, and they say, they know the best. I don't have a role. I'll just do whatever they tell me to do. They know what's best for my child. And I would argue that we only know what's best for the child if both sides participate in an active way.
Milena, we have about 5 minutes until
yes,
we do
okay.
question and answer.
Okay. Let me go to we talk about the culture, and that visual hopefully will represent how hidden those pieces are, the invisible barriers. The cultural clash that is a big part for the parents to feel overwhelmed, confused, and not supported. So what educators can do, you can read the specific ideas here, but they have to be mindful of the limitations of the system and how they need to work on that to minimize those barriers, so all the parents could have real access to the experiences of their children and build meaningful partnerships. And those partnerships should never be developed or start developed at the moment of referral or the beginning of special education. Those are practices that start from day one. They require open mindset from the educators and learning from the parents, learning from the students, and explain the systems in a more proactive way. So when it comes time to make some decisions, the parents have the background knowledge and more accurate understanding of what it is. How families can help. As you can see, the parents have a critical piece of the puzzle. We cannot complete that puzzle, cannot make that decision without considering their input. And their story matters. We talked about their story, background experiences, and how valuable they are, and how we should focus on that from day one, not at the moment of suspecting a disability. And encouraging in that process the process of acculturation versus assimilation, and encouraging the use of home language, encouraging and valuing the home culture and identity of the children and the adults, because if that's not in place, then it is much the emotional toll it takes on families is something that educators don't see, but it is real and it is painful, and the sense of loss and invisibility is just tremendous. So as far as practice, more targeted support in this process of special education, many probably exist in some places and not at all in others. Cultural brokers, understanding the cultures represented in your schools, having family advocates, possibly with similar background to the family that is participating. Individual mentoring. I'm not making this up. Last night, a Bulgarian friend sent me a long email. She has, in a different district, a child with disability. She has gone through the process, been going for 5 years. She needed someone to talk to about, like, what do I do next? So that process of mentoring is very important, providing resources to support that process outside of the meetings and the paperwork. Completing the paperwork is tremendously important. Facilitating the collaboration with other agencies, the emotional support is very big part. And what I call meetings before the meetings is, we often have meetings of 10 people. The parent walks in, we start in with the papers, with introductions, and we don't really have understanding of their understanding of what is happening now, not paper-wise, but meaning-wise. So sharing some tools is also very important. I attached a worksheet that you can see, which has like a sentence starters or questions that parents can ask in order to get meaningful feedback around the topics that they are truly interested in. I will, in the second block here, awareness and communication about it makes sense to explain the terminology, understanding what disability means, as it is very different between countries and cultures, and it's very, very emotionally difficult to process. But over-promising is something I want to emphasize. I find teachers often say, well, we cannot meet the needs, they need something extra. We develop that understanding of the parents that those special education supports will fix the child or help them be reach the level of the typical children. ask everyone to be mindful of what we are promising, because that is often not the case, and it is very important to be honest of what we are offering and what the outcomes will be. Most importantly, checking for understanding related to meetings before the meetings is the importance not to just ask the parents, do you have any questions? What questions do you have? But ask open-ended questions. And that should happen not in the big meeting, but maybe the meeting before the meeting or the meeting after the meeting, where we can ask, what do you think just happened? Can you tell me in your own words what decisions we made? What do they mean? I could tell you a powerful example in 10 seconds. There was a disciplinary hearing, expulsion hearing for a 10th grader. And there was a special educator because the student was identified. And when that was mentioned, the parent and the student was identified in 3rd grade. Has always attended US schools, and the word disability was mentioned, and parents said, what disability? What are you talking about? It was just painful to watch. And that is a parent who has attended every meeting, a parent who has a very limited cultural knowledge, very limited literacy and proficiency in the US school system. But I don't blame the parent for having lack of understanding, because I know that all of the times those meetings we talk about, they'll get this support and that support, and we don't talk about the big thing, that which is the child is identified as child with a disability. So just be mindful that there are all these areas in which we have to ask the parents what they think it means. Often they think that they'll be sent to a different school, and if we don't talk about it before the meeting or after, that they get paralyzed by that fear that the child will be now sent to a different place. One size doesn't fit all. Each family is different. The importance is to create openings, to break that wall, to create opportunities for meaningful collaboration, which will be different from family to family, but we can find the right approach for each family if we get to know each family. So that is my invitation to you to be open-minded and welcoming and curious, and value the families in every way you can, so they could be your equal partner in that process. And I wanted to thank you as well, but I'll take questions first and then I'll thank you.
Thank you very much. We do have a number of questions. The first question is, how can we prepare the families and teach them about disabilities that maybe they're not familiar with?
Sure. So I would say probably the easiest thing to do is to proactively to have periodically, maybe 3 times a year, sessions where you don't just talk about special education, but you have sessions where you invite new families to hear how general education works. They're so overwhelmed by how different, how local the decisions are, and they struggle that we don't have textbooks or other things. So if we integrate the education about general education as well as special education in multiple sessions where parents can learn how we support kids without yet talking about your child is struggling, we put them in a better position to process all that information. And when it comes time to make certain decisions, they already have more accurate background knowledge on a topic that they didn't have prior to. So that is the first step. The second step would be to really walk with the family to explain what it is. Often I find that disability term very critical because they don't see educational disability as a disability. It doesn't exist in other countries. So if a doctor didn't say you have traumatic brain injury, but we are saying you have learning disability, they struggle with that. So we have to explain what it is, how it's determined. Often it helps tremendously to say it's a process that we revisit at least every 3 years. So that's a decision being made now. In 3 years, your child may not qualify. That is a tremendous relief for the family because they have a very different conceptual understanding of disability. So walking with them through the process, mentoring, asking questions, inviting them to ask questions, any question in a smaller setting, not in front of 10 other people, OT, PT, SLP, school psych administrator, and they are overwhelmed and they just want to disappear.
Another question is, could you comment on, or do you have suggestions for teachers, administrators, and parents regarding the over-identification of English learners as students with disabilities?
Yeah, assuming that the over-identification is true misidentification, then the best bet would be strong core instruction, strong intervention supports. We know that second language acquisition takes a long time. Kids with academic gaps would need more support across the board, not just around the language, but academic skills. So by just communicating and being prepared to support immigrant students over extended period of time without considering special education unless they are truly disabled and they and there is evidence, strong evidence for that. So going back to the core instructional practices and intervention support, so we can accomplish the same or even better outcomes, have those high expectations with partners with supports would be my advice.
The next question is the curriculum for special education classes shared with the parents?
Oh, I would say probably depends on each school district, but usually it's not so much the curriculum, but more the goals and objectives. So they may not talk about in using what materials they will increase the child's comprehension, but what will be explicitly discussed would be what the comprehension goal is and what objectives they will have to meet in order to reach the ultimate goal. So it's something that could be discussed, but often that is, it depends on the team and what typically the parent would ask as well.
The next question is, how can we best help the parents to digest or accept when their child is placed in a special education class?
Yeah, I would say just it will be different for each family, and it starts with their own concerns and fears. Once we know what they are, and they're totally different from family to family, we'll then help them process that, assign meaning to the decisions, and develop comfort that is critical. I would say some of the more common ones, not that they're universal, as I said, would my child be in a they think the child will be in a different school because that's how it's in other countries. So if we help them understand that they are part of the regular class, that they go and get extra support. I have taken parents to see preschool, serving preschoolers with disabilities so they can see even who the kids are, and they develop more accurate understanding of what it looks like, not just have misconceptions that will make them more reluctant participants. The other thing is just explaining how fluid that process is. It is meant to be revisited every 3 years. It is not forever label. It also will help to, often the parents ask, what are the implications? And they ask me, and some of them have been in the process for a number of years, what are the implications for higher education? So just inviting them to share their concerns in an appropriate setting that is comfortable, and then the more we address their individual concerns and fears, the more they will feel, okay, we are in this together.
Another question is, are there any challenges that families have that many teachers may not be aware of?
Yeah, just lack of understanding even what's happening in the classroom, and for those families who are, and many are willing to support the kids at home, what can they do to support the kids? Many other countries function, their schools are based on textbooks. So when the kid comes home, they can review the lesson, they know how to support the kids. Often that's not at all the case here. We don't have any textbooks where I am. So it is really a big need that the parents have expressed. also the limitations. As I'm speaking to you now in English, I can tell you I've never read in English to my kids. I'm not a good model in English. I don't want them to speak English like me. I want them to speak Bulgarian, and I model Bulgarian. So that is one thing that is important for teachers to be very mindful of, protecting that identity, protecting the home language, building that strength of the home language and culture. But we do that by valuing it, not just dismissing it all the time and say, well, you have to learn how we do things, which is true, but that's not in place or at the cost of losing the other. So those things come to mind. I'm happy to think more, and if the person wants to contact me later.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And you kind of answered another question, which was about promoting the preservation of heritage languages by valuing it. So we are out of time. We must conclude today's online program. There was a question, when will the recording be available? It's available in about 1 week on the TESOL YouTube page. And if you need more information, you can contact our SSDIS, Supporting Students in Disability Interest Section. If you're not a part of that interest section, we hope that you will join. So we must conclude today's online program. I would like to thank very much Milena. Today's presentation was entitled Beyond Compliance, Elevating the Voice of Immigrant Families in the Special Education Process. So thank you, Milena, very much.
Thank you, everyone. I truly appreciate your interest and commitment to support the students. And you have my contact information. Reach out. I'm happy to help in any way I can.
Thank you, everyone, for being here today, and have a great afternoon.